Great. Okay, we're live. Welcome to JavaScript. Now, let's just start off by saying I'm on a Mac, and I apologize for that. There's a fair share of Macs out there. What I'm using is a text editor called TextEdit, but I think if you're on Windows, the best move for you to do this first class is to break open Notepad. And let me say that I don't have Notepad to show you, but maybe just watch me for a second. I'll give you the basics. Now, if you make a new document here, this is going to be a formatted markup that's more appropriate to documents, like an RTF, or a rich text format. And an RTF is the precursor to the .doc, which becomes the docx, which is really a very elaborate, highly stylized document. Now, it's a little bit different than what goes on the internet. So if I go up there on the internet, RTF will not work well in a web browser. You know, if you type in just about anything, it's going to come up as a HTML document. So what I need to do with this document is I actually need to save it in a format that will make it web native. So I'm going to save it as a web page. Now, TextEdit, you can save things as a .html. They just give it to you. They make it a little bit easy. Now with Windows, I'm going to say that as a Mac user, I think that Windows is more technical and allows you to think more technically when you do things. Mac takes away your technical edge, even though if you go to a Blizzard or you go to a conference where programmers almost 99% are using Macs these days. So I admire Windows because they retain the technicality of the desktop. But what you need to do if you're in a Notepad is you need to save it as a, they have an option where you say save as and you have all options. And you want to create a .html encoding for that document. So I'm going to call this demo 1 for today. And I'm going to save it on my desktop. Now granted, the Apple is very cloud integrated. I'm sure the Windows is as well. But that .html is going to be important because the web browser will pay attention to something with a .html encoding. So we'll save that. And then I can open this safely within a Safari or a web browser. So within your Notepad, if you save it as a demo1.html, you'll probably see the Internet Explorer icon within the file itself. And that says, okay, you're encoding for your browser. Now, if you don't get that quite now, don't worry. I'm sure that you will. And we might be able to plug a Windows machine in here and get around that. Guess what we're going to do next time? We're actually going to download a professional web development environment. We're going to use Eclipse. And we're going to download the JavaScript development toolkit where your JavaScript is going to be debugged. Today, you won't get that luxury. Next class, you will. Today, I just want to go over some language fundamentals. Most likely, when you type my stuff, it's going to work. You know, there, if I don't make any errors. And mine is going to be 24 size so that you all can see. And this YouTube, you can see it easily. But you should be doing it, you know, whatever font size. Okay. Now, right now, the web operates in an HTML5 idiom. And the way that we turn on HTML5 is by typing in doctype HTML. It's very simple. Now, HTML versions 3 and 4 did not make it this simple. But luckily, because of corporations like Google, who have made HTML5 somewhat of a rallying cry, you know, HTML is very much a part of the Google culture, and especially things like Gmail and Docs and wonderful things that come out of Google. Google has provided a lot of IQ as to how HTML should work. So HTML5, we're going to turn that on. Now, let me say this. This is going to be HTML that we're going to start, and we're going to intersperse some JavaScript within it. But largely, you guys are typing in source code. What's going to happen is the browser is going to operate like an interpreter. You know, let's type in, you know, NPR. You know, a good left-leaning website, which is friendly within the university. You know, if I were to load Drudge Report, I'd probably have to say trigger alert. But NPR is government sanctioned, so you're at a government school. But you go on in there and you realize that there is encoding, and if I go like this, I go inspect element, such as you should, that there's a ton of source code behind the scenes. And when I click upon this source, be it Internet Explorer or Safari or Firefox or Chrome, you realize that this good-looking page has a ton of source code moving behind it. And that's what HTML and JavaScript are. They're really the source code for the internet. Now, the original people who made browsers really commercial friendly, and we're really talking about Mark Andreessen, we're really talking about the early people at Nuclear Research in Europe, and Mark Andreessen particularly, they're all people with computer science backgrounds who came through their graduate degrees coding compilers and interpreters. Compilers and interpreters are places where you type source code, i.e. your computer code, and then it either does stuff because it's coded correctly, or it provides you with an error that it recognizes, insofar as it recognizes an error. And that source code and the compilation is an important part of computer science. So the early people who made the browsers made the browsers a compiler of sorts. And really it's an interpreter because it compiles things very fast and on the fly, very dynamically. So the browsers are really interpreters that read your source code and that print to the browser window the code as it renders correctly. Now it's interesting that NPR has a series of errors that came with it. Much of the resources, it has 107 different assets that downloaded very quickly. And if I go to a story, trigger alert, it's a story on Trump. There's a place where you can pet a pony if you don't like this news story. But whatever, and I won't show you the news story, just in case it makes you mad. That's right. But it's fun. But you can see all the code that loaded. Oh, and there's some errors on the Donald code. Don't feel bad. There's some errors on the story about Donald Trump. And here are, some errors that took place. Now there are errors inside of the browser just the same way there might be errors inside of a compiler, such as you would have already learned. So when you begin to see the browser as a place where your code interprets, you realize that you're right at home if you've already taken a programming class. You're right where you belong. And so what we're going to do is we're going to combine the HTML, which is responsible for how stuff looks, and the words that appear, and the images that appear, and the YouTubes that appear, with the JavaScript, which works quietly behind the scenes, providing basically artificial intelligence in a best case scenario to make your text smart and informative and worthwhile and meaningful. So when you combine those two tools, i.e. the markup provided from the HTML and then the workhorse code provided by the JavaScript, you have a very, very perfect application environment, right? And so HTML5 is meant to be that perfect platform. So let's go ahead, let's put up some HTML. And the topmost element that we need to include within HTML is called the body. And the body is that which appears. The body are the visible elements on the page. Now what's so great about the story, the NPR page, is that the head, or the non-body, there's hundreds of lines of code even before the body begins, right? And usually that's all about getting the page positioned to work well. And you're going to see more about this. But right now we're going to jump right into the body, which is where the content is going to execute. And I'm going to say JavaScript and validate input. Good, and we'll close that down. And we'll save that. Now what's going to happen is we should see JavaScript can validate input when we open up the page. And we're going to close that tag. And then I'm going to close the body. And then I'm going to say to the compiler, okay, please stop interpreting HTML. And that will be the end of this particular document. And so therein lies the kind of structure of any given web page, which is you say, hi, browser, begin compiling HTML. And now here's the topmost element of the web page. And what's so fascinating about the web is that each document is built into different structures so that pieces of the document can execute like their own page, if you will. But ultimately, there's one top-level page that's responsible for all the little web pages that may load within it. Like if you go to your Gmail, there's probably a series of small little sections within that page. The same thing applies to your Facebook wall. That is, if anybody here not using Facebook any longer? So you all admit to using Facebook. Busted. I'm kidding. It's so typical these days where I have a student who's like, well, I don't have a Facebook account. And they're like the rebels. The Mavericks, they're off the grid. All I'm saying about Facebook is that when you check out your Facebook, there's a whole lot of different data elements that seem to be loading independently. There's the ad element, there's a chat element, there may be a news element that's giving you a news feed, there's the wall that is dynamic in itself. And you realize that the Facebook feed is kind of interesting because there's a multitude of littler web pages within this web page that are acting on their own. But what happens is even though Facebook has this dynamic feel to it, ultimately the entire page happens within one body. So that body is what's called the top-level HTML element, or if you want to really be technical, the top-level JavaScript node. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. Now if I do this correctly, I should be able to just open this up and it should be showing. So I think my encoding is a little off. So what I want to do is I want to save this in a way that looks like HTML. And I hate making errors, but you can see that it's showing the markup versus showing the raw page. It is in fact an HTML document, demo1 HTML. So most likely I did something wrong in the process, even though it should be loading up just fine. So I don't quite see my error right now. And I might have to pause. Yep, I'm not seeing where I'm making my error, but I'm going to keep going, and maybe I'll catch my error in a moment. It could have something to do with the size of the text. But we'll get it in a sec. Are you okay in Notepad?
Yeah.
Good old Notepad. Honestly, I didn't want to get you guys right into the Eclipse game right now. Eclipse is a little bit of a lecture into itself. I just want to get you using the markup. So that's what I'm going to do. And you know, I find that when I do a demo, if I make an error, eventually I get around to fixing it. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm not going to. If I make an error, you know, can't get too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new tag, which is called a paragraph. Now what's fun about a paragraph is a paragraph gives you a space right ahead of it and a space right behind it, right after it. and it structures whatever's going to come next. But a paragraph usually is dedicated to text. So I'm going to say, please input a number between 1 and 10. And I'm going to say, okay, well, that's the end of the paragraph. And then I'm going to create a little input. And it has an identifier of num for number. And it's going to be of type number. Now, an input type is a space where you can add text. And we'll show you. And then I'm going to add a button right below it, which is going to be of type button. So it's an object that is a button. And I'm going to say when I click it, onClick means when I click it, I want to run a function below called myFunction. And what that's going to do is that's going to take place when I submit when I press that button. So make sure your onClick, it's all little case. And then I want to create a paragraph down there with an ID of demo. And that will be the end of that. Now I'll sit still with that. Now a couple things here. Input, button, type, button, ID num, type number. Those are all things that JavaScript needs. HTML and JavaScript needs. But these things, demo, ID of type, or num, those are things that you and I determine. Those are programmer determined. But the ID makes it so that this HTML element is visible to JavaScript a little bit later. And this is a theme that I'm going to repeat a lot during the class. Like just about everything in this class you'll hear about 20 different times. Okay? So if it's a little bit disorienting right now, just stick around a little bit. You'll probably hear it discussed again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of JavaScript below. And JavaScript is going to look and feel a lot like the Java that you've seen this far. And I'm going to actually code the body or the substance of the myFunction. And it's going to have two variables, x and text. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to get the value of the input field in my HTML above. With the ID of num. Num is short for number, of course. Now what's cool here is you can see that this is a comment. It looks a lot like the Java comment that you guys are used to. And so this is going to be a little program that is going to be put right inside of your HTML. It's a little piece of software that's hidden inside of your web page. That's the right way to think of JavaScript. And I'm going to wrap up the script in a moment, and I can actually go here and say, okay, here's the end of my script. Just the same way I terminate my body and my HTML. And so I'm going to say let x be equal to, and I'm going to write this down, and just stick with me a sec. Get element by ID of num. And that's a lot to look at. Believe me, you'll code get element by ID so much in this class, you'll remember how confused you are right now, and you'll laugh a little bit. But let me say this, and let's just stop. You can go ahead and code, but let's just halt the press for a minute. Have you guys seen anything called num before in this document? Have you seen that ID of num used before in this document? And yeah, you've seen num, and it's right up there, and it's the input. Now, input is going to be a blank space where people can type a number. And then what this is going to do is it's going to look inside the document, and it's going to get the element by ID of num, and it's going to grab the value of that, and it's going to assign that to the variable of x. So the user is going to type something in there, and then our program is going to grab that value, which is kind of cool. And then when I want to do a little test on their input. If x is not a number, or it's less than 1, or greater than 10, do the following. And these are going to be comments right here. Do the following. If is not a number, is none. If x is not a number, or x is less than 1, and those bars are right above your enter key. Those aren't L's or 1s. Those are the bar right above your return. You probably knew that, but it deserves to be repeated. Or it's less, or it's greater than 10. Begin evaluation. That variable of text is going to be equal to input is not valid. Otherwise, and I'll indent this a little bit. Otherwise, else, the text is going to be equal to input is good to go. Thanks. Put a little humanity into it. Okay, and I'll let you wrap that up. Now you can see where the brackets are operating. Really, there's 2 brackets, and it's okay to just make it look like this. Fancy bracketing is not great. I like very, very basic looking bracketing. Like it's high school computer class. That's how brackets should look. They should look so harmless. And this is going to be your little formula right here, your little recipe. So what's going to happen is your text variable is going to change depending upon what the person typed into the num. And I'll just move that down a little bit. And then we have one line to run to wrap this up. I'm going to say, go ahead and get the element by ID by the name of demo. And then take the text inside of it, or the inner HTML, and set that equal to the text which you've just set. And that should be the end of the function. And we could bracket that way. I really like putting brackets on their own line so it looks even more basic. And then I like to take comments and I like to get them out of the way a little bit. So there's a little bit of explanation. This is my favorite way to set comments, is right after the line. That's my favorite way. I think that's the best way. But if you can't do it that way for whatever reason, try to get it out of the way a little bit. Comments are really great, but they can quickly overwhelm people in their reading process. And that will be our intro code, which of course you can find on our GitHub. And we'll reiterate that URL, Stefan Bund. And this long PDF is where I'm grabbing all of our sample code. Now, don't copy and paste it. I mean, you guys can copy and paste all sorts of stuff. Don't copy and paste it. Go ahead and give yourself the luxury of typing it, and you will make it a part of your DNA. You'll get good that way. Don't give yourself the shortcut because you're depriving yourself of getting good. But naturally, if you need to see this example after the video is done. So go ahead, type that into your document and tell me a little bit about what happens. Righto, YouTube out.